My name is Mike Wilson, and until tonight, I thought my life was pretty good. But I didn't know it was about to turn into hell. In one night, everything I loved was taken away from me, or threatened to be taken away. But I survived, and for many years I found comfort in a verse from the Bible. Not every man that runs shall be a winner. Not every man that fights shall be the man that saves. Not every man that has a sword shall be able to handle it. Not every man that has a shield shall be able to bear it by the ends. I married Jenny Smith 3 months after graduating from college, and we were married for just over 7 years when Jenny completely betrayed me. I reviewed every minute of our married life that I could remember and found nothing to indicate that my life was about to turn into a nightmare. I was completely stunned. Jenny and I met in college. She was very attractive, about 5'5", with blonde hair and emerald eyes. Jenny wasn't particularly wealthy, but in my eyes, she was perfect. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is a goddess, Jenny was a 9, maybe even a 9.5. But there was something about her that drew people in. Jenny drew me, body and soul, to hello. We were so right for each other, and our goals seemed to match perfectly. At least the goals Jenny told me about. Anyway, we dated and eventually got married. If Jenny was a 9 or a 9.5 with fantastic charm, I was an 8 or an 8.5, but I was more of a quiet and strong type. I'm 173 centimeters tall, weigh 86 kg, and have sandy hair. I had a fairly active social life in school and college, and I was no stranger to adventure in the bedroom. I would never have been mistaken for a sports star or a movie star. However, I did occasionally attract the attention of girls who didn't have a boyfriend. I won't bore you with the long story of how Jenny and I got together, but suffice it to say that we met in statistics class in high school. Over the next year and a half, we became inseparable. And before graduation, I was lucky enough to find a good job, so our future looked very bright. One thing that should have alerted me was that Jenny was very reluctant to introduce me to her parents, John and Alma. It wasn't until after we were married that I realized Jenny was very shy around them. In fact, I don't think I would ever have met them if I hadn't insisted on talking to her father before proposing. For a couple of days, I thought we were on the verge of breaking up. But then Jenny relented and agreed to let me visit her parents. At that meeting, I learned that Jenny had grown up in a very poor family and was very ashamed of it. But I thought they were wonderful people and that Jenny had nothing to be ashamed of. They were warm, compassionate, and very friendly. They didn't have much, but they were always willing to share what they had. My father died when I was 14, and my mother died when I was 20. So I came to love John and Alma Smith as my real parents. They lived in a small house in an old, not-so-nice neighborhood. It was a one-story house with just over 100 square meters of floor space. It was simple, with 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. They had a decent living room but a small kitchen. Nevertheless, John made sure the house was in good condition and the lawn was well kept and mowed. Alma, for her part, kept the house clean. Over the years, it upset me that my parents neglected Jenny. But whenever I brought it up, it led to an argument. So I avoided mentioning John and Alma, but I always kept an eye on them. I called them at least once a week, and sometimes I managed to get Jenny to talk to them. But besides wanting to stay in touch, I listened to see if they needed anything. For example, I found out once that John's lawnmower had broken down, and he didn't have the money to repair it. I bought a used lawnmower and told John that I had a new one and he could have the old one. I think he understood what I meant, but he gratefully accepted the lawnmower. As I said, I had a good job with a good salary, so I was willing to help if needed. I started out as an accountant at a fairly large manufacturing company with plants in 5 states and 2 foreign countries. I worked at the company's head office, where the accounting department consisted of only 18 people, including me. Despite the small size of the department, we handled all accounting and tax operations for all divisions of the company. Although I was an entry-level accountant, I was paid a high 5-figure salary. But 3 years after I joined the company, 2 things helped me advance my career. First, John Stanton, our department manager, retired. Second, I passed the certified accountant exam. At first, they tried to hire a new manager from outside the company to replace John. But when that didn't work out, I was offered the position. I was promoted to head of the accounting department, and my salary rose to 6 figures. This made Jenny very happy because now we could afford a bigger house and more expensive cars. Shortly after our wedding, Jenny became pregnant, and we had twins, a girl and a boy. At first, Jenny was not happy when she found out she was pregnant. She complained bitterly that it was too early, that she wanted to travel and enjoy life first. But I was thrilled. Fortunately, after the birth of our twins, Glenda and Mark, Jenny became a wonderful mother. For the first 5.5 years, she was a housewife. But when the children started nursery, Jenny insisted on getting a job. With a degree in English, the only decent paying job she could find was as an administrative assistant at a law firm. When I found out where Jenny would be working, I was concerned that she might stray. I had read many stories about married women who had affairs with one or more lawyers while working at law firms. However, that did not happen. Her boss was Clem Flint, one of the firm's senior partners, 55 years old, with a paunch. He had a wife whom he adored and 5 children. Mr. Flint, like his partners, was a devout Christian and did not tolerate infidelity. Our marriage seemed very strong. However, in the 6th year of our marriage, I noticed that Jenny was not herself. One day I asked her about it after she yelled at Glenda for forgetting to put a plate in the sink. "What's wrong, Jenny?" I asked quietly. "You shouldn't take it out on her. It's just a plate, for God's sake." Jenny started crying. "It's not about the plate. I'm just depressed because I feel like my life is passing me by and I don't have a chance to live. I feel like I'm just someone's wife or mother. There are so many places I want to visit, but I'll probably never see them. So many wonderful things we'll never be able to afford. My life is shit." I was shocked by how Jenny described our life together. I decided she was having a midlife crisis or something and suggested she see a counselor. My suggestion was met with hostility. "I'm not crazy. I just want a better life." With that, Jenny left. For weeks, my children and I lived like beggars. But it wasn't all bad. Jenny would lose her temper, and then we would be a happy family for a few weeks. But then the unhappy Jenny would reappear. I was convinced that this was just a temporary phase and that Jenny would eventually snap out of it. And if not, I would marry her, for better or for worse. I loved Jenny with all my heart and was sure that she loved me. Besides, we had 2 wonderful children and I knew that Jenny loved them. They were beautiful children, and I spent as much time with them as possible, especially considering Jenny's mood swings. I felt sorry for the children because they didn't understand why their mother was sometimes sad and angry. So I tried to shield them from it and always told them that no matter how she behaved, their mother loved them very much. On weekends, I often planned trips around town with Mark and Glenda. Sometimes Jenny would join us, but more often than not, she didn't. The children loved it when their happy mother came with us, but they were glad when we left their unhappy mother at home. The atmosphere in our house was tense until the 4th of July picnic, which my company organized every year. It was a fun time for all the employees, and surprisingly, Jenny even looked forward to it. After the 4th of July picnic, things were better than usual at our house. Jenny's mood improved dramatically, and our life returned to normal. I couldn't have been happier. But then came the New Year's Eve party at my company, and my life turned into hell. Jenny and I usually skipped the company New Year's Eve party. Neither of us was much of a drinker, and I liked dancing more than Jenny did. So for both of us, New Year's Eve was just an excuse to drink a lot of alcohol and have fun. We would usually take the kids out to dinner, put them to bed, watch the ball drop, and then go to bed and make love to celebrate the new year. This New Year's Eve was different. Jenny told me that for the first time in many years, she really wanted to go out. She explained that it was because we hadn't danced in a long time. I thought that was strange because Jenny wasn't a very good dancer. It all seemed strange to me, but if Jenny wanted to go to a party to dance, I was happy to go along. When we arrived at the party, I was surprised to see our company owner, Brad Colson. The only company event he ever attended regularly was the 4th of July picnic. In fact, it was at the last 4th of July picnic that Jenny first met the company owner. It was obvious that everyone was a little surprised to see the boss at this party. Apparently, he liked picnics because he loved playing volleyball and softball. He was a pretty good athlete, but no one dared to tell him he wasn't as good as he thought he was. We have a few guys who played baseball in college or high school, and one girl who went to Ohio State University on a full scholarship to play volleyball. Once Jenny was settled, I went to get drinks for us. But as soon as I returned, the music started, and Brad asked my wife to dance. He danced for 3 or 4 songs and then brought her back to our table. When I asked Jenny to dance, she said she just wanted to relax. But half an hour later, when Brad showed up, she jumped up and danced with him for 5 songs in a row. In the end, I managed to dance with Jenny twice before she said she was tired. About 15 minutes before midnight, Brad returned. Jenny didn't even look in my direction when she took his arm. To say I was angry was an understatement, but I didn't want to embarrass myself in front of my boss. I would talk to Jenny when we got home. I sat there thinking when someone said there was 1 minute left until midnight. I looked around for my wife because I wanted the new year to start with a kiss from her. But I froze when I saw Brad pull Jenny towards him and kiss her on the lips. Rage boiled inside me, and I headed towards them, who were still embracing. I pushed Brad away from my wife and shouted, "Let go of my wife, you bastard!" The room suddenly fell silent, all eyes fixed on us. No one had ever spoken to Mr. Coulson like that before. I didn't care that he was my boss. He had crossed the line, and I wasn't going to take it. I didn't care if he fired me or not. My heart was racing, and I could feel my face reddening. I wasn't a fighter, but if Brad was going to do something bad to me, I was ready to fight him face to face. But he just grinned. "Jenny, it's time to go home," I said, clenching my teeth. I reached for Jenny's hand, but she pulled it away sharply. "Mike, I'm sorry," Jenny said, taking Brad's hand. "But I'm going with Brad. It's just for tonight. We'll talk tomorrow." I was so stunned that I couldn't say a word. Before I knew it, Brad and Jenny were gone, and everyone else was staring at me. It was the most humiliating moment of my life. I went straight home, the day after DD. When I woke up on New Year's Day, I was suffering from the worst hangover of my life. The previous night had been filled with tears, drinking, and lack of sleep. I cursed everything and everyone. I made plans to get revenge on Brad Coulson. I was sure he had tricked my wife into leaving me. I had already rehearsed what I would say to my wife when she came home, and I had no doubt that we would have to spend a lot of time in therapy. Yes, despite my complete disrespect, I wanted Jenny back. I loved her so much. Nevertheless, I racked my brain for ways to really ruin Brad's day, but all the plans that came to mind were extremely cruel. And as quickly as I came up with one, I dismissed it because I didn't want to go to prison for something as trivial as Brad Coulson. It took 3 hours, but I finally managed to get rid of the severe headache. I called the nanny and told her I'd pick up Mark and Glenda in a couple of hours. Then reality started to sink in, and I became paranoid. What if Jenny had decided not to come back? Suddenly, it became a real possibility for me. What if she took the kids? Then I'd be finished. I quickly got dressed and rushed to pick up the kids before Jenny figured out what was going on. I wanted to start the conversation with Jenny from a position of strength. The kids were happy to see me, but they wanted to know where their mum was. I had to gather all my strength not to break down in front of my children. Taking a deep breath, I lied. I told them that their mum had gone on a business trip. They looked disappointed until I asked if they wanted to go to IHOP for pancakes. While the kids were eating, I started making 2 lists. One about how we were going to deal with this situation, and another about how to plan for a divorce. When I got home, I was both relieved and disappointed that Jenny wasn't there. I wanted to work things out with my wife, but I was afraid of what I might say or do. At that moment, I saw that my answering machine was flashing. It was a message from Jenny, who had decided that since my emotions were so strong, it would be better to postpone our conversation for a week. She explained that Brad needed a secretary for a business trip, and she was going to fill in for her. It turned out that Jenny was lying. The only person who could replace her was Brad. I crumpled up the list of how we could make up and threw it in the trash. The emotional pain I felt at that moment seemed 10 times worse than any physical pain I had ever experienced in my life. It's impossible to understand what it's like to be betrayed by someone you loved and trusted more than anyone else in your life. In those days, I realized how a person could go mad and inflict terrible physical harm on those they supposedly loved, thoughtlessly destroy property, and even contemplate suicide. All these thoughts spun endlessly in my head. Finally, thankfully, I was able to dismiss one of them. I would never kill myself because I loved my children too much. The thought that they might die because of my selfish act made me cringe. However, other dark images continued to surface, and a new one joined them. Were Mark and Glenda really my children? I readily agreed when the children asked if they could play in the yard. I needed some free time to gather my thoughts and start planning a new life. While the children were playing, I began to make a list of things I needed to do to protect myself and the children from the coming storm. The first item on my list was a DNA test. I bought a test kit when we went to the restaurant. I tried to include as much information as possible, but I realized that I had probably left out a lot. So the first thing I did was call a friend who had been through a divorce and ask if he could recommend a divorce lawyer. He said he couldn't, but he would definitely recommend his ex-wife's lawyer. I asked if I could have the lawyer's name and phone number. After a few minutes of searching, he gave me the information I needed. The lawyer's name was Tom Watson, and he had an office with 3 other lawyers who specialized exclusively in divorce, wills, and inheritance matters. I called the number, even though it was New Year's Eve, thinking I could leave a message and they would call me back on Tuesday. To my surprise, a man answered, "Tom Watson." I quickly realized that I was talking to the lawyer I wanted to hire, and without letting him talk me out of it, I explained my problem. He was probably going to schedule an appointment for me, but I mentioned that my wife's lover was Brad Colson. That piqued his interest. He asked if I could come to his office at 9 a.m. on Tuesday. I said I could if I could find someone to watch the children. Please bring the children with you. They will help you understand what I think you should do. Before you come, gather all your financial documents, including bank statements, credit card bills, utility bills, and mortgage payments. I also want you to make a list of everything you and Jenny have spent more than £100 on. Don't forget to bring your birth certificates, marriage certificates, social security numbers, tax returns for all the years you've been married, and anything else that might be relevant. After gathering everything I could find, including a copy of the text message Jenny had left me, I spent the rest of the day playing with the kids. In the evening, on our way to Joe's Pizza, I stopped by to get a DNA test. After taking swabs from my child's cheek and mine, I took the kit to the Federal Express office. The company conducting the DNA test promised that the results would be ready in 2 days. I breathed a huge sigh of relief when the test results showed that the children were mine. The next morning was a bit hectic as I fed the children and got them ready. Before leaving for my meeting, I called work and told them I wouldn't be coming in for the rest of the week. Tom Watson's office was larger than I had imagined, and after the introductions, Tom led us into a spacious conference room. I took Mark and Glenda to a corner and gave them mini tablets so they could play educational games. Tom and I sat down at the conference table at the other end of the room. I broke down twice while telling him how my wife had left me on New Year's Eve for my boss. I still couldn't believe she had thrown me out like a piece of trash. Tom was very understanding and compassionate. He told me that everything would be okay, but I was in too much of a dark place to believe him. When I finished telling him about my problems, Tom took out a photograph and handed it to me across the table. "There's something I want to tell you before you agree to hire me. This is a photograph of my cousin, Abby Colson. She was married to Joe Colson, Brad Colson's brother. Joe cheated on my cousin and then left her for another woman. I represented Abby in her divorce, but I was cheated because Brad paid for his brother's lawyers. They buried me in paperwork, and I was too naive to realize what they were doing. I had just passed the bar exam and still believed that everyone played by the rules. Abby was in a losing situation. It took me 5 years, but I finally got the court decision partially overturned. Since that day, I have been working to become the best family lawyer I can be. Although I didn't get Abby what she deserved, my partial victory angered him. And while I'm ready for a rematch with Mr. Colson, I want you to know that Brad will be coming after you with his lawyers, especially considering that I'm representing you. But I promise I'll do everything in my power." "That's enough for me," I replied firmly. "Let's get started." I suddenly felt relieved that someone was on my side and that I could finally fight back. We spent the next 3 hours going through all the documents I had brought with me, discussing what I could expect, and finally, I was asked what I really wanted out of all this. Of course, I would prefer that none of this had happened, but that's not possible, so I want the house, half the assets, full pension, no alimony, and no child support. "Perhaps you should lower your expectations," Tom said solemnly. "But I will fight to get all of that for you. Do you want full custody?" I shook my head and then explained, "If Jenny doesn't want the children, I do. But I know she loves them and will probably fight for full custody. I think joint custody would be fair." "To be honest, I'm leaving," Tom said grimly. "You need to prepare yourself for the fact that she will probably get primary custody. Given Mr. Colson's wealth and the likelihood that he intends to marry your wife after the divorce, she may become a housewife. If you don't plan to remarry and can't prove that your wife is a housewife, I think the best you can hope for is liberal visitation rights. But knowing what a jerk Colson is, they'll probably fight for that too." "That's really awful," I said, venom in my voice. "I didn't do anything wrong, but I ended up in a losing situation." "As far as your children are concerned, that's probably a fair assessment. However, the upside is that if your wife marries Brad, you won't have to pay child support. But the downside is that you'll still have to pay alimony to your ex-wife. I'll be happy to pay alimony just to see the kids. At the last meeting, Tom talked to Mark and Glenda while I was out of the room. I don't know exactly what they talked about, but Tom came out with the kids looking happy. "You must be a great father," Tom said, taking me aside, "because your children love you so much." Unfortunately, they seem to love their mother too, but not as much as they love you. I left Tom Watson's office with an improved financial situation, but very concerned about how much time I would be allowed to spend with my children. Tom said he would draft a divorce petition and a petition for temporary custody of the children. We plan to give them to my wife shortly after she returned from her business trip. 8 days after D-Day. Jenny called in the morning and asked if we could talk. I said yes and arranged for the children to be somewhere else. Everything went as Tom had predicted. I no longer had any illusions that Jenny wanted to reconcile. Although she tore me apart, there was no putting the genie back in the bottle. Our marriage was over, and Jenny turned to prostitution. I wasn't surprised when she rang the doorbell. Tom had warned me to expect this. Nevertheless, I made her wait and rang the doorbell twice more. When I finally opened the door, I struggled to contain my emotions. I didn't say a word, just turned and went to the kitchen for a beer. When I sat down at the table, Jenny asked where the children were, and I almost lost my temper. But instead, I calmly said, "So now you're worried about them." "I guess I deserve it," she hastened to reassure me. "But I sincerely believe that after I left you on New Year's Eve, our meeting would be very unpleasant and dangerous. I'm sorry for that. We didn't plan for me to leave you that night. I was going to tell you about it on New Year's Eve, but Brad didn't want to wait any longer. Besides, the trip came about because Brad was having problems at one of his factories. He convinced me that it would be better to give you some space. And Brad was absolutely right. At first I wasn't sure, but after this trip I realized that he is my soulmate. Isn't it amazing that your other half turned out to be super rich?" I heard the sarcasm in my voice. "I guess you came to talk about our divorce. Let's get down to business so you don't waste my time. I have more important things to do than talk to you. I need to go to the toilet." Anger flashed in Jenny's eyes. "There's no need to be rude and insulting. I don't care what you think." Jenny was furious. She wasn't used to being spoken to like that. "I don't have to sit here and listen to insults." "Then leave," I said, standing up and heading for the backyard. I didn't really want Jenny to leave. However, considering my mood, it would have been the best solution. But apparently, my behavior had made her nervous and she lost her fierceness. "No, I think we should end this conversation." Then she rummaged through her purse, pulled out an envelope, and handed it across the table. I opened it and began to read. Tom was right again. The terms Jenny offered were quite generous until I got to the last paragraph. At that moment, I almost lunged across the table to slit Jenny's throat. I threw the papers in her face. "Tell Brad Colson to shove that offer up his arse. I will never agree to him adopting my children. And offering me £100,000 to agree is just despicable. Mike, Brad, and I can offer the children a much better life than you can. Go to hell, Jenny. And your shitty husband can go to hell too." "Mike, this is what's best for the children," she began, ignoring my insults. "I'll stay home, and they'll be able to go to the best schools. They'll live in a better house and be able to travel. You can't give them that. But if it helps, Brad is willing to pay you $250,000 for permission to adopt them. Jenny, you're not only a whore, you're an idiot. What don't you understand about get lost and get lost with your other half?" "I'm sure Brad will increase his offer to $500,000, Jenny said quickly. "That's probably more money than you'll ever make in your entire life. We've barely been able to make ends meet on your salary. And don't forget that Brad is your employer, and your job could disappear in the blink of an eye. Even if he offered $100 million, I wouldn't take it." I was on the verge of doing something stupid, and I needed to calm down. I wanted to throw Jenny out the door, but that would ruin Tom's carefully laid plan. I glanced at my watch, then turned back to Jenny. "I've had time to think about our marriage, and I've realized it's not perfect. You may think you've got a gold coin, but you don't. For a while, our marriage was pretty good. But this past year, you've been a terrible wife, a terrible mother, and a terrible person in general. We weren't just making ends meet. You always spent more than we needed to because you had to have the best of everything. I don't need crumbs from Brad. And if Brad is going to fire me, I'll file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The court has granted me custody of the children because you refuse to have them. I didn't give up my children, she said angrily. At that moment, the doorbell rang. That's for you, I said with a smile, heading for the door. When I opened the door, I saw the sheriff's deputy. I stepped aside so he could see Jenny, who was standing right behind me and to the side. He nodded and asked, "Are you Jenny Wilson?" After she showed him her driver's license, he handed me an envelope and said she had a court summons. I smiled as I watched her read the divorce papers and then run away in tears. God, that felt good. She just left. They served her, I told Tom on my mobile phone. I hope you behaved yourself, Tom asked. It was difficult, but I behaved myself. However, Jenny left here in tears after they served her, I admitted. I don't understand what that has to do with anything. You can't be wrong about what they're going to offer. True, they added one punch that almost knocked me out. It looks like Brad Colson wants to adopt my children. He can't do that, can he? I didn't expect that, Tom admitted. As for terminating your parental rights, that will be extremely difficult unless they can prove that you are a completely incompetent parent. So you need to be very careful how you behave towards your wife and Brad. Also, try to stay close to people who can speak up for you if necessary. I don't think that bastard Brad will be able to make up a story and find witnesses to back it up. I know you're a good father, but don't forget that they may try to twist even the most innocent events to make you look bad. Now that I know their plan, we'll be ready. Tom, will it ever get easier? I asked as the pain of Jenny's departure washed over me again. Yes, it gets easier, Tom replied immediately. And if you're honest with yourself, you'll admit that you're not as devastated today as you were the night your wife left you. However, there will be many good days and bad days ahead. And I want to warn you that as we move forward, we're probably going to lose a few battles with Brad and Jenny, but every time we lose, we'll regroup and find new ways to fight back. Like they said in the 60s, don't lose faith, kid. During the week I took off from work, I made all the financial arrangements Tom advised me to make. I opened new accounts and transferred half of all my money into them. I arranged after-school activities for the twins. Their school had a program where the children could stay until 5:30. This was ideal because I worked from 7 in the morning until 2:30. This gave me enough time to get home, do some housework, and still put the children to bed. This week also gave me the opportunity to plan the time I would spend with the children. Jenny was very relaxed about housework, especially when it came to putting the children to bed. However, I needed to establish a stricter routine if I wanted everything to work. I made them bathe, brush their teeth, and go to bed by 8 p.m. At first, they protested, but when I promised to read them 2 stories instead of 1, they began to look forward to bedtime. The time I spent with the children was a lifesaver for me. We grew even closer, and surprisingly, they didn't ask about their mom very often. But one day, Mark asked if his mom was ever coming back. I didn't want to hurt the children, but I wasn't going to lie to them either. I told them the whole truth. Their mom had found a new man whom she liked more than me and wanted to live with him. What's more, she wanted him to be their new dad. Both children started crying, and I felt terrible. Perhaps I had said too much. So I quickly assured them that no matter what, I would always be their dad. That calmed them down, and I got 2 big hugs. When Saturday morning came, it was time to take the children to their riding lessons. Even though their mother hadn't seen them for over a week, Mark and Glenda were excited because they were going to see Miss Darla. The riding lessons were my idea, which Jenny had opposed. Like many little girls, Glenda loved horses and wanted to learn to ride. Mark just agreed because he didn't want to be left out. However, Mark quickly became a much better rider than his sister. Darla Lampson owned a horse farm where riding lessons were also given. She was an excellent instructor, and the children adored her. She was cheerful, with a pretty face, but she was overweight. However, she had a warm smile and a contagious laugh. She liked me from the first moment she saw me. Jenny teased me, saying that I liked her because she laughed at my corny jokes, which was true. Darla, on the other hand, I liked right away. "Where's Mrs. Wilson?" Darla asked, as I stood at the fence of the paddock. "Mrs. Wilson and I are getting divorced," I replied honestly. "I'm so sorry," Darla said quickly. "I didn't mean to pry." "No, it's okay," I said to reassure her. "It just happened. I just hope we can continue riding with the kids. The kids are living with me now, but my lawyer says the court will probably grant her primary custody and me visitation rights. I'm going to fight for joint custody, but things aren't looking good." "Why?" Well, as soon as the divorce is finalized, Jenny will marry her rich lover. Then she'll sit at home and I'll have to hire a nanny. And to top it all off, I work for that jerk Brad who stole his wife. So, as if I didn't have enough problems, I'll soon be out of a job when he starts tightening the screws. It's not Brad Colson, is it? Darla asked, narrowing her eyes. Yes, do you know him? I've never met him personally, but I've had dealings with his lawyers. His property borders my ranch, and he wanted 2 acres of my land, but he didn't want to pay for it. All he wanted was to create a buffer zone between his property and mine. All he did was plant dozens of trees and shrubs. Damn, if he had asked me, I would have done it. But Mr. Colson doesn't believe in asking. He believes in taking what he wants. Anyway, his lawyers filed one motion after another, and I couldn't afford to take him to court. Besides, the land was mostly swampy, and I wasn't using it. After 5 months of litigation, I decided I was wasting my money fighting for land I didn't use. In the end, I agreed that if he paid my lawyer's fees, I would give up my rights to the 2 acres in his favor. As a result, my property taxes went down a bit. Nevertheless, the whole experience left a bad taste in my mouth towards Brad Colson. I hope I'll be around when he gets what he deserves. Yes, I agree with you. Brad is a real piece of shit. But my soon-to-be ex-wife chose him to tie her star to. And I'd like to be there too when not only Brad, but also my wife gets what they deserve, I said, hoping that Brad would leave her sooner rather than later. What are you going to do if Mr. Coulson fires you? Darla asked. I've already started a new career. I'm a tax consultant, but I work as an accountant for Mr. Coulson. I've always done taxes and accounting to earn extra money. Recently, I expanded my business and brought in 3 small businesses that want me to do their accounting and taxes. It's still not enough to live on, but I'm saving all the money I earn from my main job and my side job to help myself when I get fired. Right now, I'm working from home, but I'm pretty sure I'll have to put it up for sale as soon as the divorce is finalized. Then I'll have to find a flat that's not suitable for running a business. Well, if you can do my accounting for the money I'm paying you now, Darla said gently, I'd be happy to give you my business. I can't ask you to do that, I objected. If your accountant is doing a good job, there's no reason to change him. I don't know how well he does his job, Darla smiled. He was the ranch accountant when my father died and left me this property. It's one of the big accounting firms in town, Minter, Smith & Zeller. They handle my payroll, quarterly and annual taxes, and I pay them £2,000 a month and about £5,500 in federal taxes. I don't know anyone at the firm, and when I called them once with a question, they didn't get back to me for several weeks. I glanced quickly at Glenda and Mark and saw them happily jumping horses over a 2-foot fence, with the instructor running alongside them. Then I turned back to Darla. All right, if you're sure, I'll take a look at your books right away. If I can do this work for the same money, I'll add you to my huge list of clients. Darla laughed and led me into her office. She took out the handwritten books for the current year and the tax returns for the previous year. I quickly realized that the price set by Minter, Smith & Zeller was simply outrageous. I can't work for that kind of money, I told Darla with a smirk. I can't in good conscience charge you more than £750 a month and £2,000 for your federal tax return. No, Darla insisted. I'm willing to pay you that much. No, I don't work that way. I think your current accountants are cheating you. You're probably too small a client for them, and they don't care if you leave. I'll only take you on as a client if I can offer you a fair price. Wow, I didn't expect that, said Darla gratefully. That will help me a lot. I've had a very hard time since I bought the ranch 3 years ago. Saving £150 a month will really help, thank you. And of course, Glenda and Mark's lessons will be free from now on. I can't ask you to do that, I protested uselessly. You didn't ask, Darla smiled. I'm offering. Getting Darla, a ranch owner, as a client was a big help, but the divorce was just getting started. I had a long and unpleasant road ahead of me. Besides, despite Tom's assurances that everything would be better, nothing was changing. It seemed like every week there was a photo of Brad and Jenny in the society pages of the newspaper. It was so unfair. Jenny's life seemed perfect, while mine was in shambles. Added to that was the frustration of not being able to figure out how to get back at them. I was lonely and miserable. 2 to 8 weeks passed after DD Day. My day started off great when I got a call from Harvey's Hardware, offering me a job as an accountant, but then the day turned into a complete nightmare. When I got to work, I was told I was fired. I wasn't surprised and even felt relieved. After the New Year's party, things were very awkward. Although no one said anything to me directly, it seemed like conversation suddenly stopped when I entered the room. Nevertheless, losing my job was depressing. Brad was still pulling all the strings. Tom was already preparing documents to file a wrongful termination claim with the EEOC. He told me, however, that it would be a long and difficult fight that could take years. But Tom sent out a press release about my fight with Brad, which I heard didn't anger my former boss too much. The day took an even worse turn when, a few hours later, Tom called to tell me that the judge had signed a joint custody order for Jenny that evening. I was stunned until Tom explained that it wasn't as bad as it sounded. The children would stay in the house, but Jenny would also be able to live there. Realizing how inconvenient this would be, she decided not to exercise this right. Instead, she would pick up the children from school every day, and I would pick them up in the evening. This was a nightmare for me. Every evening, I had to look after Jenny and Brad while picking up Glenda and Mark. And Jenny usually made sure I saw how happy she was. She would hug Brad, kiss him, or say something affectionate. I was completely depressed, and the children, even worse, were completely confused. I didn't think the situation could get any worse, but I was wrong. As soon as Jenny got joint custody, her lawyers started filing motions to change the children's primary residence to Brad's house. The basis for their motion was that I was denying Jenny visitation rights. They also claimed that I was trying to turn the children against her. Upon learning of this, Tom immediately filed a complaint with the court, claiming that I had never denied Jenny visitation rights. Moreover, he offered to let the judge talk to the children when they spoke to their mother in the evenings. The children always asked, "When are you coming to see us, Mummy?" Fortunately, the judge decided that the children would stay at home for the time being. However, he did not mention the allegations against me. Tom was concerned about the lack of response because he felt that the judge was not giving the divorce case the attention it deserved. But as he pointed out, it was fair to note that the judge had 30 or 40 cases waiting to be heard at any given time. Then the judge changed his mind and ruled that we would take turns caring for the children for 2 weeks at a time. In his infinite wisdom, he decided that the children would travel between our homes. At first, I thought this would be very inconvenient for Jenny, since the children's school was a 35-minute drive from Brad's house. But I didn't think about how devious Jenny and Brad were. However, I soon found out. As soon as Jenny left me at the New Year's Eve party and drove home with Brad, I realized that I had never really known this woman. To be honest, I don't think Jenny knew herself either. Still, it's hard to let go of someone you love so desperately. However, when Jenny took Glenda and Mark away for the first time, I was shocked by what my soon-to-be ex-wife said to me. Jenny looked nervous but determined. As soon as the children were in the car and out of earshot, she turned to me. "Please don't make the divorce difficult. I still care about you and I don't want Brad to destroy you. If you let Brad adopt the children, I'll give you full visiting rights. But I want you to understand, I won't let you ruin my relationship with Brad." Wow, I shook my head. And I thought you were just a fickle whore. But I was wrong. You're also a cunning bitch. You gave me full visitation rights like a pig's eyes. Go to hell. I turned and walked towards the house, but over my shoulder I heard her say, "You've been warned." I called Tom as soon as Jenny left and told him what she had said. Tom wasn't surprised. "I told you to expect the worst from Brad. Have you installed the cameras in the house yet?" "The outdoor cameras will be installed tomorrow, but right now I have one in the bedroom, one in the kids' room, and one in the hallway leading to the bathroom. We also have one in the living room and one in the kitchen. Tomorrow, they'll install cameras in the front yard and backyard." "That's all we can do for now," Tom said, looking satisfied. "But keep in mind that Brad's lawyers will probably accuse you of abusing him. The cameras should refute any such allegations." The days Mark and Glenda spent with Jenny were difficult. Brad led a very active social life. He and Jenny were often featured in the tabloids, or I saw them on television. If it was a daytime event, their children were often with them. In all the photos I saw, Jenny was beaming, and the children looked excited and happy wherever they were. Each of these photos broke my heart even more. I couldn't compete with Brad's money. I felt like he was slowly stealing my children away from me. On Monday of the 8th week after Jenny left, everything went haywire. Around 9 in the morning, I got a call from the children's school saying that Mark and Glenda hadn't come. I immediately called Jenny. "Are the children sick?" I asked with great concern. No. What makes you think that? Jenny replied smugly. The school called and said they hadn't come in. Oh, that, Jenny dismissed. I transferred them to Chesterton Primary School. It's a much better school, and it's only 5 minutes from my house. You can't do that, I growled. I can, and I did, she growled back and hung up. My desperate call to Tom did little to calm me down. He explained that we would have to fight for a transfer to another school, but that the judge would most likely grant it because the new school had a much higher rating. As I understand it, the courts do what they think is best for the children, even if it sends them the worst possible message. In this case, it meant that their mother could do whatever she wanted and their father was powerless to do anything about it. As I sank deeper into depression, Tom warned me that the worst was yet to come. He advised me to be especially vigilant because, in his opinion, this was only the first salvo from Brad and Jenny. He was absolutely right, and I thanked God that Tom had insisted on installing surveillance cameras and transmitting the images to a security company and cloud storage. On Tuesday, Tom filed a complaint about the changes at school. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. But on Wednesday of that same week, Jenny's lawyers filed a complaint accusing me of abusing our daughter. I was furious, and Tom had to use all his powers of persuasion to keep me calm. However, two things happened, but I thought only one of them would end well for me. An emergency hearing was scheduled, but I was barred from seeing my children until the investigation was complete. I wasn't even allowed to visit them under supervision, as this was a court case. Tom immediately obtained a court order to find out the details of the allegations. He wanted Jenny to provide more specific information. Fortunately for me, the judge did not believe their arguments. He had encountered similar tricks many times in the past. Let me make myself clear, Mr. Silas. The judge looked intently at Jenny's lawyer. I take these allegations very seriously. If they prove to be true, I will see to it that Mr. Wilson is brought to justice to the full extent of the law. However, if I find that your client is trying to deceive me, it will not do Mrs. Wilson any good. I expect you to provide Mr. Watson with a detailed account of when, where, and what happened. Am I correct, Mr. Silas? Jenny's lawyer paled slightly and nodded. I also noticed that the smile on Jenny's face had suddenly disappeared. The next day, Mr. Silas sent the charges by email, but they did not contain any specific details. I was furious that they were still playing games and trying to ruin my life. But Tom assured me that we had enough evidence to completely refute their allegations. The emergency hearings began. All right, Mr. Silas, you've made this allegation, so what evidence do you have? The children told their mother about it, replied the lawyer. And given the seriousness of the situation, we took immediate action to protect them. Mr. Watson, the judge turned to Tom. What does your client have to say about this? Your Honor, both my client and I maintain that this accusation is completely false. And when we prove it, we will ask the court to impose sanctions on Mrs. Watson. If Your Honor will allow, I would like to show a series of video recordings provided by Able Security. At my suggestion, Mr. Wilson installed cameras inside and outside his home because he feared that this particularly outrageous accusation would be made. Mr. Silas immediately jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is highly improper and at best questionable. How do we know these videos haven't been tampered with? The judge sighed irritably. Clearly, Mr. Silas, you are unfamiliar with the security system installed by Mr. Wilson in his home. The video footage taken at Mr. D. Wilson's home is sent directly to the Able security system. From there, they are stored on the security company's server for 1 year. If I remember correctly, the video is also stored in cloud storage. The video can only be accessed from the server or cloud storage with the passwords of 2 company employees. It is a reliable system, and I trust it. When the video footage was shown, the judge was satisfied that nothing had happened at the time Jenny had indicated. The judge was dissatisfied. After talking to the children for about 20 minutes, the judge and my children left. They were sent back to the hallway to wait with the babysitter Jenny had brought. After talking to the children, I have decided to leave this as a misunderstanding. But keep in mind, Mrs. Wilson, if this happens again, I will not look kindly on you. Your Honor, Mr. Silas stood up. Since we are here, perhaps you could make a decision about the school transfer. Yes, that would be appropriate, the judge said slowly. After visiting both schools, I agree with Mrs. Wilson that Chesterfield Primary is better. I spoke with the children, and they said they liked that school. I dodged a bullet but lost an important battle, and that defeat was even worse than I had anticipated. Mike, I'll be honest with you. The judge's decision was a bad one. It virtually guarantees that Jenny will get primary custody of Glenda and Mark. However, there were two positive things that came out of today's hearing. First, you're not going to jail and you won't be separated from your children. And second, since they couldn't charge you, you'll at least get visitation rights. Yes, I know how it works, I said with growing anger. Jenny will find a way to ruin my visits. We'll complain, the court will tell Jenny not to do that, and those two nasty bitches will come up with a new way to ruin my life. Isn't there anything I can do to stop them? Tom shook his head slowly. Unless you move into the Chesterton School District and get married, I don't see how the judge can rule any other way. That Saturday, the kids were at my house and I took them to their riding lessons. I usually enjoyed watching them ride and sometimes chatting with Darla. Today, however, I was in an extremely depressed mood. My life was in ruins. Not only had my wife left me and I lost my job, but as far as I could tell, her life was perfect and mine had turned into a nightmare. And she was going to take my children away from me. It was so unfair. She had cheated on me, and I was the one being punished. Hey, Mike, Darla said, sitting down next to me on the bench. You look really down. Things can't be that bad, can they? I explained to Darla that when my divorce from Jenny was final, the children would probably stop going to class. I told her that in order to get joint custody, I would have to move to the Chesterton School District and get married. But I had no prospects for marriage, and I couldn't afford to move to Marion County. No offense, Mike, but your wife is a first-class bitch, Darla said. Ever since she enrolled your kids in school, she's treated me like dirt. When she showed up and started pestering me, I wanted to tell her to get lost. But then I saw the look on Glenda's face and I couldn't. I smiled sadly. I'm not offended. I agree with you. We sat in silence for a few minutes, then Darla straightened up. Hey, I have an idea. My house and half of this property are in Marion County and the Chesterton School District. Why don't you move here and we'll tell everyone we're married? Then you'll be on equal footing with your wife. I smiled at Darla for a few minutes, but then I started to think about her suggestion. The more I thought about it, the more I thought it might work. So I asked Darla to come with me to my next meeting with Tom to explain our plan to him. He rejected the idea immediately. Mike, I understand you're desperate, but a fake marriage won't work. You'll have to show a marriage certificate, and when they realize you're deceiving them, they may give Jenny sole custody. I was bitterly disappointed, but Darla continued to insist. What if we get married anyway? What, we can't do that, I replied immediately. No, hear me out, Darla demanded. Let's say we announce that we're engaged, and when you get divorced, we'll get married at the registry office. In the meantime, you can move in with me. I have 3 bedrooms, I'll sleep in mine, and you can have one of the others. There's even a study in the front of the house. You could run your accounting business there. You could pay me a nominal amount for rent and sell your house. What do you say? Tom looked from Darla to me and then back to Darla. I was encouraged that he didn't refuse right away. However, he had his doubts. Well, at first glance, what you're proposing isn't necessarily illegal. However, you'll have to have a real wedding ceremony. Besides, there are other things to consider. We'll need to draw up an agreement specifying Mike's financial contributions to the house. I would insist on a prenuptial agreement specifying what property each of you will keep in the event of a divorce. And if you divorce within a year, I think Brad and Jenny will be able to prove that it was a marriage of convenience. I would suggest at least a year and a half. I agree to everything, Darla said immediately. My head was spinning, and I wasn't sure it was the right decision. Now that I've thought about it, I'm not sure. Darla, this is very hard for you. Anything I can do to spite Brad is all I can do, she said with a smile. 8 weeks to 18 months after DD. After we signed all the papers Tom had prepared, Darla seemed absolutely happy with everything that was happening. I decided she must hate Brad as much as I did. The gist of what we agreed was that we would be married for at least 18 months and could divorce at any time after that. The division of property was clearly agreed upon, and each of us kept what we had before the marriage, as well as everything we earned during those 18 months. I paid rent for living in Darla's house, but this was specified in the marriage contract as my share of the household expenses. The next day, Darla and I went to the county courthouse and filed for a marriage license. We had our blood tested and then waited for the court's final decision on child custody. Tom filed for joint custody, and Jenny's lawyer filed for sole custody. While Darla and I kept our plans secret, Jenny and Brad announced theirs to the whole world. Photos with details of their wedding appeared in the tabloids. Apparently, there would be more than 500 guests at the wedding. Not surprisingly, I wasn't among them. On the day of the final hearing, I had a knot in my stomach the size of a ball. Although I felt that I was now on equal footing with Jenny and Brad, I knew the legal system well enough to understand that honesty and fairness are often not the basis for a final decision. Jenny's lawyer, Mr. Silas, began by listing my shortcomings in detail. Mr. Wilson is currently unemployed and struggling to pay his bills. He does not live in the Chesterfield School District, where Glenda and Mark Wilson currently attend school. In addition, we remain concerned about Mr. Wilson's mental state. "Objection!" Tom exclaimed, jumping to his feet. The judge looked sternly at Mr. Silas and motioned for Tom to sit down. "Mr. Silas, do you have any evidence that Mr. Wilson's mental state poses a danger to the children?" "No, Your Honor," replied Mr. Silas. "Then don't bring it up," replied the judge sharply. "In brief," Mr. Silas continued smoothly, "Jenny Wilson and Brad Coulson plan to marry shortly after Mrs. Wilson's divorce is finalized. Mr. Coulson's home is in the Chesterton School District, and he has considerable means. Mrs. Wilson will be a housewife. Therefore, we believe that sole custody of the children is in the best interests of Mrs. Wilson." After Mr. Silas sat down, Tom stood up. "I would like to correct some of the inaccurate statements made by Mr. Silas at this hearing. First, Mr. Wilson has no problem paying his bills. I am submitting his financial statement to prove that Mr. Wilson has sufficient funds to pay his bills and care for his children. However, if Mr. Wilson were experiencing financial difficulties, it would be because Mr. Coulson unfairly terminated his employment. We have filed a claim against Mr. Coulson's parent company with the EEOC. We expect a favorable outcome when the case is concluded. In addition, Mr. Wilson has started his own accounting firm. I have attached the financial statements for this business, which show that it is profitable and growing. Furthermore, Mr. Wilson is engaged to Darla Lampson and is currently living in her home in the Chesterfield School District. They plan to marry as soon as the divorce is finalized. We therefore respectfully request that Miss Wilson be granted primary or, at the very least, joint custody." When Tom sat down, I looked at Jenny. Her face was stunned. Brad was red with anger, and Mr. Silas looked annoyed. I felt the most satisfying feeling I had felt in weeks. We had clearly caught them off guard. "I would like to speak with the children before making a decision," the judge said, turning to the bailiff. The knot in my stomach doubled in size and began to churn. The judge spoke with the children for about 20 minutes, and when they came out, they looked confused and uncertain. But then they saw me and waved. I smiled and waved back, and they both smiled. They stopped and hugged their mother before leaving the courtroom. "Making custody decisions when both parents love their children is the hardest part of my job," the judge began. "When I have to choose one parent over the other, it's very painful. However, in the end, I have to do what's best for the children." The judge paused briefly and took a sheet of paper out of her folder. I looked around the courtroom and saw smiles on the faces of Jenny, Brad, and Mr. Silas. My heart sank. She was going to win again. "As I said, I must act in the best interests of the children," the judge continued. "In this case, I had to take into account that both parents can provide for the children, allow them to attend the same school, and have the same family status. The decisive factor was the children's wishes. After talking to them, I learned that they want to spend time with both parents. I am therefore granting joint custody to Glenda and Mark Wilson. The children will spend 2 weeks with each parent. The agreement comes into effect this Sunday, and as the children are already with Mrs. Wilson, she will be with them first. 2 weeks after this Sunday, Mr. Wilson will pick up the children. Since their homes are only 5 to 10 minutes apart, this will not be difficult for either parent. The handover of the children will take place no later than 2 o'clock on Sunday every 2 weeks. Are there any further questions?" When no one said anything, the judge announced that the divorce would take effect in 30 days and banged his gavel. The property settlement had already been agreed upon. Everything would be divided equally. The house was listed for sale and should sell fairly quickly. After all the expenses, Jenny and I would each get $6,000. I'm sure it was pocket change for Jenny, but for me it was extra money that could come in handy. I was beside myself with joy, but I wanted to pretend that this was the expected outcome. Stepping out into the hallway, I hugged the children. Then I went over to Jenny and Brad, who were berating Mr. Silas for the judge's decision. Mr. Silas tried unsuccessfully to explain that there was nothing he could do. "Sorry, Jenny," I said with a smirk. "Sorry to interrupt your rant, but I wanted to clarify when I can pick up the kids 2 weeks after Sunday." "This isn't over, you bastard," Brad growled. "Come on, Brad." I waved him off. "I just want to know when I can pick up the kids. I don't want to be accused of trespassing. If you want, we can meet somewhere neutral, like McDonald's." "The judge said 2 o'clock, you idiot, and that's how it's going to be until our lawyers overturn the decision," Jenny snorted. "You've really hit rock bottom, marrying Miss Piggy to get joint custody." The last remark was completely out of line and angered me, so I lunged at him. "You're just a loudmouth. You're marrying your grandfather." "You're a little shit," Brad shouted. "Come outside. I'll knock you to the pavement." I wasn't going to fight Brad. He was 3 inches taller than me and weighed about 30 pounds. However, I was angry at everything, so I lunged at him. "Don't you need to get your cane from the car first?" Brad lunged at me, but I jumped back before he could reach me. Jenny must have realized how this could end, and she grabbed Brad's arm. At the same time, Mr. Silas stepped between us. "Mr. Colson, please," he pleaded. "If you attack Mr. Wilson, the court may grant him sole custody of the children." "Please, Brad," Jenny begged. Suddenly, I realized that my 2 children were clinging to my leg and shouting at Brad, "Don't hurt our daddy." Jenny glared at me, but then turned her attention back to the children. "It's okay, kids. Mr. Colson and Daddy were just fooling around. Come on, let's go get some ice cream." As they walked away, I turned to Jenny. "I'll be there at 2 p.m., 2 weeks after Sunday." Jenny just glanced at me, but I didn't say or do anything. At the appointed time, I picked up the children, and we went to the cinema and dinner with Miss Darla. Brad's lawyers couldn't change anything. The children were thrilled that I was living on the ranch with Miss Darla. They rode horses all the time and loved cooking with Darla. When Jenny and I got married, I did almost everything myself. Jenny didn't even know how to boil water. 30 days after the judge's decision, Darla and I were married in a courthouse with our children present. Her best friend officiated in Darla's place, and Tom officiated in mine. After the ceremony, I kissed Darla on the lips. Her face reflected pure joy. A week after our wedding, an article about Jenny and Brad's wedding appeared in the society pages. Jenny looked as happy as she could. However, the happiness on my children's faces struck me to the core. It was unfair. But as the weeks passed, it seemed that Tom's prediction that the pain would fade with time would never come true. Even if the pain wasn't as acute on some days, my nights were filled with loneliness and torment. For the first 6 months, I tried to think of ways to get revenge. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't think of anything that wouldn't land me in prison. How could I hurt a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars? And what could I do to Jenny, tell her parents? They already knew, and Jenny didn't care. Still, it hurt me deeply because every photo in the newspaper showed a woman who was radiant and happy. She had a career, and she had abandoned me. In my darkest moments, I considered poisoning my children after telling them about their mother. But I loved them too much to do that. My pain remained acute. What was even worse was that my children seemed content with the new arrangement. And I couldn't blame them because, to be honest, they had everything they could want. They saw their mother and father regularly. The children told me how wonderful everything was with Brad. They raved about the swimming pool, the jacuzzi, the playroom, the tennis court, and the large televisions in every room of Brad's house. He even had a mini cinema with a popcorn machine. About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Jenny changed the peaceful rules we had been living by. She began to manipulate Glenda and Mark, turning them against me. Jenny subtly implied that I was a bad father because I didn't spend as much money on them as Brad did. When they told me this, I was filled with sadness and anger. When Darla found out, she was furious. She insisted that we gather the children and talk to them. So the next time they came to stay for 2 weeks, I sat them down at the kitchen table and asked, "Guys, do you think I'm a bad father because I don't spend as much money on you as Brad and your mother does?" "That's what Mom says," Mark replied, uncertainly. Mark's son, Mr. Colson, is a very, very rich man. That's why your mom decided to marry him. I can't afford to buy you everything they can. You see, compared to Mr. Colson, I'm a very poor man. All I can do is love you boys and tell you that if all these gifts are so important to you, I won't make you come to the ranch anymore." Glenda started crying. "No, Dad, I don't want to be with Mom all the time. I want to be with you too." "Me too," said Mark, and tears welled up in his eyes. I don't know what the kids told Jenny when they got back to her, but it made her really angry, and she rushed back to the ranch. "Why the hell are Mark and Glenda mad at me for picking on their poor dad?" she snapped at me when I opened the door. I wasn't going to get into an argument with her, so I just said, "Go to hell, Jenny." Then I slammed the door in her face. That was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, Jenny started planning special trips for the kids. The first was a trip to Disneyland. Of course, they wanted to go and begged me until I gave in. Jenny started doing this about every 3 months, and it really annoyed me. The idea of how to get out of the situation with Jenny came to me thanks to Darla. The next time they came to me asking to go to New York, I said yes, but only if we switched weeks. When Jenny refused, the kids were upset, but not at me. A point in favor of the good guys. It was a very stressful and depressing time in my life. Fortunately, I had great support. Darla was always there to support me when I started to give up. But I had two more allies, John and Alma Smith. Yes, Jenny's parents became my loyal allies. When Jenny married Brad, she didn't even invite her parents to the wedding. She was embarrassed by them and didn't want her parents to ruin her special day. When I found out, I invited them to the ranch for a barbecue on the wedding day. Darla insisted that John and Alma stay for the weekend. We had a wonderful time with them, and I learned that John had been a soldier in Vietnam. He had been wounded 3 times but survived the war. He returned home partially disabled, which limited his ability to work. It wasn't that he couldn't work, but employers, seeing his 3 missing fingers and the scars on his face, decided he would be a liability. I was very impressed when Alma told me that he had been awarded 3 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and a Silver Star. This man was a real hero, and Jenny was ashamed of him? I think that was the moment my feelings for Jenny began to fade. Since then, we usually invited them over for at least one weekend when the children were with me. Jenny refused to invite her parents to her new home or visit them at theirs. The way Jenny treated her parents broke my heart. At least Mark and Glenda got to meet their grandparents when they came to the ranch. And I learned one more thing. John grew up on a cattle ranch. Before Vietnam, he was a real cowboy. John even convinced me to start learning to ride a horse. It opened up a whole new world for me in terms of connecting with the kids. Over the months, I read a lot of books about divorce and co-parenting. One piece of advice proved very valuable. The author suggested giving children experiences instead of things. Darla got creative and came up with lots of fun activities. We visited all the local attractions, went hiking many times, played bowling, and even mini golf. Darla even teamed up with a local charity to organize a mini rodeo. To make it even more fun for the children, she involved them in the planning. Glenda and Mark were eagerly awaiting their first rodeo, especially when they found out they would be leading the parade through town. However, Jenny tried to ruin the rodeo by offering to take the children to Disneyland in California. But Mark and Glenda flatly refused their mother. They didn't want to miss their first rodeo, and it was such a success that it has become an annual event ever since. During the first year after the divorce, Jenny continued to try to win the children's affection. She never stopped making snide remarks about me. From time to time, she would convince the children to give up a few days they could have spent with me to be with her and Brad. And although I felt bad every time the children chose to spend time with their mother instead of me, I never said anything to them. And every night when they were with me, I continued to read them 2 books before bedtime. Of course, as they grew older, I had to read the books chapter by chapter, and I read several chapters every night. This continued until they were in 5th grade. Even though we didn't sleep together, living with Darla was very pleasant. She was fun to be around because she was always cheerful and kind. And working in her office, I was able to grow my accounting business. By the end of the first year, I was earning about 70% of the salary I had earned working for Brad. Nevertheless, even a year after the divorce, Jenny was still trying to outdo me in the eyes of the child. By this time, however, Brad realized that I would never let him adopt my children. Realizing this, he began to lose interest in them. He was still kind and friendly to them, but they were just strangers to him. Brad began to monopolize more and more of Jenny's time. Brad wanted Jenny to be with him when he traveled abroad. If she had 2 weeks to spend with the children, they would travel with them. At first, I was against Glenda and Mark leaving the country. I had heard horror stories about spouses kidnapping children and fleeing to countries with no extradition. Jenny kept insisting that I let the children go on their first trip abroad. Darla convinced me that although Brad was a scumbag, he couldn't afford the scandal that kidnapping my children would cause. In the end, I agreed. Glenda and Mark were thrilled with the trip and talked about it for days. Several more trips followed, during which the children traveled abroad with their mother. Once Brad's trip was delayed and I thought Jenny would just keep the children with her. But instead, she called me and put the children on a plane home, where I met them at the airport. The first anniversary of my divorce passed unnoticed. It was only when Tom called me one day to see how I was doing that I realized it was my wedding anniversary, and I hadn't even mentioned it to Darla. At that moment, I had to admit that Tom was right. Almost all the pain, loneliness, and anger were gone. Sometimes there was a slight resentment, but mostly Jenny was just an unpleasant memory for me. However, I felt very guilty for not giving Darla anything for our anniversary. I realized it wasn't a real marriage, but Darla had been so supportive that I bought her flowers and took her out to dinner. I didn't think much of it, but Darla was happy for a few days after that. However, as we approached the 1.5-year mark, Darla became moody. She wasn't unpleasant, but I could see she was upset. I decided I had exhausted all my resources and started looking for a new place to live. Although childcare wasn't a big issue in those days, I didn't want to take any chances. I searched for a long time until I found a townhouse to rent. It had 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. There was also a garage for 1 car. But most importantly, it was in the Chesterton School District. I really didn't want to move. I liked living on the ranch, and running my business from my room was just perfect. Besides, I really liked Darla's company. Until the last few weeks, she had always been happy and cheerful. On my advice, Darla expanded the ranch. She bought another 200 acres of land in the Rocky Hills. The trails on those hills were especially popular with those who didn't want to just ride in the corral. It was a great place for groups to spend the weekend riding horses, camping, and cooking outdoors. It was a favorite spot for corporate weekend team-building retreats. Then I convinced Darla to start organizing summer camps for children. They became very popular, and Darla had to hire additional staff to run them. Darla then built a dozen cabins for adults who wanted to work on a real horse ranch. I helped arrange financing for this project. The business that had barely supported Darla was now bringing in nearly $200,000 a year after taxes. My business had grown so much that I had to use my office and a spare room. I had a secretary and an accountant working for me. My income was about 70% more than what I had earned working for Brad. I had completely forgotten about it, but Brad's company finally agreed to pay compensation for the wrongful dismissal claim. Tom thought I should have asked for more, but I wanted to get it over with as soon as possible. I was paid $250,000. Although Tom was entitled to a third, I gave him half. I put the other half aside to buy a new house and office equipment. On the eve of the 18th month, when the children were with their mother, I announced my intentions. Darla, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, I began, feeling sad. You saved me when I thought I was going to lose Mark and Glenda. I know it was very difficult, but it was a lifeline for me. Tomorrow is the last day of our lease, so I found a place to stay temporarily until I buy a house. And I hope it won't be a big problem if I use the study for another month, as I haven't signed the office lease yet. I hope everything will be ready by next week. I didn't know what reaction to expect, maybe relief, but I didn't expect what I got. Darla burst into tears and ran to her bedroom. I was stunned and didn't know what to do. I tried knocking on her door, but Darla didn't answer. As I lay down to sleep that night, I was overcome with a deep sense of anxiety. Although Darla and I were married, there had never been any intimacy between us. I loved her without question and cared deeply for her. She was everything Jenny was not. But the entire time I lived in her house, I was afraid of hurting her. So I kept my distance. Except for the occasional hug or kiss on the cheek, we lived separate lives. I talked to her in the mornings. However, around midnight, a violent thunderstorm broke out. Lightning struck very close to the house. One strike was particularly close, shaking the house and waking me up. A few seconds later, my bedroom door flew open and Darla slipped inside. Mike, please, I'm very afraid of thunderstorms, she whispered. Can I sleep with you? Of course, I said, pulling back the covers. Shivering, Darla pressed herself against me. Then I realized she was naked. I'm really scared of thunder and lightning, she whispered, trembling. I pulled her close and hugged her. Please, Mike, I know you don't love me, but I want you to make love to me just once before you leave. At that moment, I realized that I had very deep feelings for Darla. It wasn't the same love I felt for Jenny. It was a more mature friendship that had grown into something more over the past year and a half. Sex with Darla that night was the last piece of the puzzle that healed me. Darla, I don't know if it's love, but I know I never want to leave you. At first, I thought we were just friends, but with each passing month, my feelings for you grew. For the last few months, I wanted more, but I was afraid you didn't feel the same way. I couldn't risk you kicking me out if I made a move. Oh, Mike, I fell in love with you almost from the first moment I saw you. But you were married to Jenny, and I knew you loved her madly. When she left you and we came up with a plan to pretend to be married, I thought I had a chance. But today, when you told me you were leaving, I was stunned. I love you so much. I'll be a good wife to you. Please give me a chance. I'll only leave if you kick me out, I said, kissing her gently. This is my home, and you are my wife from this moment on and forever. A year and a half after D-Day. After that night with Darla, we woke up to a sunny day with not a cloud in the sky. Suddenly, I saw my messy life in a new light. I had survived a terrible betrayal, but I had come out of it in a much better position than I could have imagined. The pain, anger, and loneliness were gone. Now I could think about Jenny without feeling a tightness in my chest. I finally felt the opposite of what I had felt for my ex-wife. Now I was indifferent to her. What had once been a sham marriage was now real and full of love. I decided that Darla and I needed to go on a honeymoon. I asked her where she wanted to go to celebrate our final realization that we loved each other deeply. I expected her to say something like Paris or Hawaii. I wouldn't have been surprised if she said Las Vegas, but she didn't want to go to any of those cities. Instead, Darla wanted to go to Montana. Why Montana? I asked. My dad always told me stories about the ranch he worked on in Montana. He really enjoyed working there, and that experience made him want to have his own ranch. So when he moved to Texas, he bought some land there. At the time, land was much cheaper. Anyway, I always wanted to see Montana, but I didn't want to go alone. Why didn't he just buy a ranch in Montana? I asked. Because he hated winter. So we spent 2 weeks in Montana, traveling around the state, and even stayed at a working ranch for a week. Darla got a lot of ideas for her ranch. But the best part of the trip was the nights when we cuddled and explored each other's bodies. The children were happy to see us when we picked them up. And then they told me something that made me sad. Jenny and Brad had flown to Eastern Europe because Brad was opening 4 new factories in 3 different countries. While they were away, they had hired a nanny to look after Glenda and Mark. The children were unhappy that they were being looked after by a 50-year-old nanny who wouldn't let them do anything except go to school, do their homework, and watch a little television. The nanny couldn't swim, so they couldn't even go to the pool. When Jenny picked up the children 2 weeks later, I asked her about it. Jenny, the children told me that you and Brad flew to Europe and left them with a nanny. That's none of your business, Mike, so don't start. I raised my hands in surrender. I don't want to argue. I just said that if you need to go away, we'd be happy to take the kids and not hire a babysitter. We were on a business trip this time, so we couldn't help. I'm just saying it's an option. The custody agreement is very clear. 2 weeks with you, 2 weeks with me and Brad, Jenny said in an unpleasant tone, then told the children to get in the car. The next day, I called Tom and told him about my conversation with Jenny and my offer. He advised me to wait until they did it again. Maybe it was just a one-time thing. 6 weeks later, it happened again. I found out when I called the children. Jenny and Brad had left for another week-long trip. By that time, Tom had already filed to modify the custody agreement. When Jenny returned from Europe, she called me and was furious. She had seen the notice of the custody modification hearing. Jenny told me in no uncertain terms that hell would freeze over before she would agree to any changes in the custody agreement. Tom told me that the court would most likely rule in her favor. However, I told him that I wanted to try. Jenny's lawyer, Mr. Silas, did not seem too happy to be in court on this matter. I also found it strange that Brad was not there, only Jenny. Your Honor, this is a waste of the court's time, Mr. Silas said. The custody agreement has been in place for almost 2 years. My client sees no reason to change anything. Your Honor, we're just trying to do what's best for the children, Tom replied, presenting his arguments. We understand that Mr. Coulson travels a lot, and it's only natural that he wants his wife to accompany him. All we are asking Mrs. Colson is to allow the children to stay with their father while she is away. And if Mrs. Colson returns before the 2 weeks are up, the children will be returned to her home at a time convenient for her. Mr. Silas, do you have anything to add? The judge looked at him over his glasses. The custody agreement is working, and Mrs. Colson would prefer to leave it unchanged. The judge looked at the two tables and then back at the lawyers. All right, that's simple. Although I agree with Mr. Silas that this custody agreement seems to be working well, and I fully understand that Mrs. Colson will be traveling frequently with her husband. However, there is no reason to deprive the children of their father's company when their mother must be away. Therefore, I grant Mr. Wilson's motion to modify the custody agreement as proposed. I was stunned by the judge's quick decision, and even more surprised that he ruled in my favor. But when I saw the cloud of anger hanging over Jenny, I knew a storm was coming. "Why are you such a pain in the ass?" Jenny asked me in the hallway after the hearing. "Jenny, I don't know what your problem is, but I'm tired of it." "What's your problem?" "You're not around, so why can't the kids stay with me?" "From what I hear, Glenn and Mark would have a lot more fun than sitting with that Nazi you hired as their nanny." "Go to hell, Mike," she hissed and walked away. "Do you know what her problem is?" I asked Tom. "I can only guess," he replied. "I think Jenny hates not being in control, but more importantly, she's afraid the kids will start loving you more than her." "You're probably right," I agreed with a sigh. "Jenny always tries to turn the kids against me, and she always makes me wait 10 or 15 minutes when I pick them up. But I still don't understand. Jenny has everything she wants, so why does she have to be so mean to her?" "Because she can," Tom said with a smile. "Come on, buy me dinner." 2 years after that first night Darla and I spent as a real married couple, we had a baby girl whom we named Wendy. A year and a half later, we had a baby boy whom we named Stephen. Darla was not only a wonderful mother, but also a second mother to Glenda, and Mark became very protective of his new brother or sister. The next 5 years flew by in a flash, and at that time, I would say that Mark and Glenda were with me 70 to 80% of the time. Jenny and Brad seemed to be jumping all over the house. After our divorce, Jenny hardly had any contact with her parents. They visited her and Brad once or twice a year, usually for dinner at a restaurant. John and Alma were never invited to parties at Brad's house, never invited to stay overnight at Brad and Jenny's house. On the other hand, Darla and I invited John and Alma over almost every weekend. The kids loved it when they came, and I admit so did I, because they were like second parents to me. Besides, I enjoyed talking to John about his life. He had accomplished a lot in his life. He had worked on a ranch, driven a truck, and repaired cars. He was also one of the people who helped build the first World Trade Center. John worked on all stages of the construction. He was a carpenter, plasterer, and electrician. He could even build a house and pour the foundation. Despite his shortcomings, he could do anything. From time to time, John would talk about his service in Vietnam. On those rare occasions when he talked about his military experiences, I couldn't tear myself away from the chair next to him. He was a true American hero. I was very concerned that Jenny ignored her parents, and I know it hurt them deeply. I tried to talk to my ex-wife about her attitude towards her parents, but I always got the same response. "Mind your own business." I continued to follow Jenny and Brad on social media, as it had become a habit, but the children also enjoyed looking at their mother's photos in the newspapers. When we first separated, I watched closely to see if Jenny and Brad's marriage would fall apart, as I was sure it would. But over the years, Jenny and Brad seemed very happy, and although I never asked, according to Mark and Glenda, life at Brad's house was pleasant. The children even loved Brad, and he seemed to be kind to them. He also bought them lots of things that children always love. Sadly, Alma died of cancer about 8 years after our divorce. She spent her last days with us at the ranch. Quite a few people came to the funeral, which was held in our town. There is a private cemetery on the ranch from the 1870s, and John asked if we could bury Alma there. We agreed, of course. John also asked if he could be buried next to her, and we agreed again. I wasn't sure if Jenny would come to the funeral, as she had only spoken to her father once since her mother's death. That was when John called his daughter to tell her about her mother's death. However, Jenny did come with Brad. She was wearing a dark blue dress and sunglasses. I was a little surprised by Brad's appearance. His hair was starting to thin and turn gray. He also had a small belly. I thought he was spending too much time traveling, eating in restaurants and not exercising enough. John stood up to greet his daughter, and it was an awkward moment. They stood there looking at each other for what seemed like an eternity until John hugged his daughter. At first, Jenny just stood there, but then she slowly hugged her father. Brad walked over to John, shook his hand, and offered his condolences. Mark and Glenda, who were crying, came over and hugged their mother. Brad turned to me, nodded, and grinned. I think he expected me to recoil from his presence. Instead, I smiled, held out my hand, and shook his hand. When we tried to take our seats in the front row, there weren't enough. I offered Brad my seat in the second row. Brad wasn't thrilled with the idea, especially when John insisted that I sit next to him. In the end, Darla took my seat in the second row next to Brad. When the ceremony began, I heard Brad grumbling behind me. Then I heard Darla hiss something at him. A minute later, Brad got up and left. When it was over, John invited Jenny and Brad to the ranch for the funeral and a meal afterwards, but Jenny declined, saying she had to catch a plane. I knew that was nonsense, but I didn't say anything. After the memorial service, I found Darla alone and asked her what had happened between her and Brad during the service. He got angry because you were sitting in the front row with his wife, Darla said, shaking her head. But I was sitting on the one side of John and Jenny was on the other. We weren't sitting together. I pointed that out to the arrogant Mr. Coulson and then told him to shut up because the world doesn't revolve around him. Darla smiled slyly. I think he was offended. We laughed about the incident, but we shouldn't have. Brad doesn't respond well to people who don't show him proper respect. In other words, he's a vindictive jerk who sincerely believes that his shit doesn't stink. 2 weeks later, Brad launched a new attempt to seize land on Darla's ranch. This time, he demanded 10 acres of land adjacent to his property. His lawyers discovered that the 10 acres had once been a separate parcel of land. Due to a clerical error, they had not been included in the single property title for the rest of the ranch. Therefore, no taxes had ever been levied on those 10 acres. Brad instructed his accountants to calculate what the taxes on those 10 acres should have been and paid that amount to the county. His lawyers then demanded a refund of the tax. Darla was upset by this demand, even though the 10 acres were a mixture of swampy and rocky land. Darla asked me if she should just sign the document, since the land wasn't worth that much. No way, I replied immediately. Brad is acting like a tyrant and trying to put you in your place for insulting him. Last time, you didn't have the money to fight him. It's time to shut up and end this relationship. His claims are fabricated. As I predicted, the court ruled in Darla's favor. The judges ruled that the county was at fault for not collecting taxes on the 10 acres of land. What's more, the county should have notified the current owner first and given him the opportunity to pay the overdue bill. To top it all off, the court limited the tax payment period to 5 years. After that, I didn't see Brad for a long time. From time to time, I saw him and Jenny on social media. During that period, I rarely saw Jenny. Most of the time, when I came to pick up the children, one of the staff members was already waiting for me at the front door, which suited me fine. Besides, Jenny continued to miss the children as Brad traveled more and more. Over the years, I estimate that the children spent about 9 months a year with me. It got to the point where they hated going back to their mother in Brad's house. They complained that Brad had become moody and that their mother was almost always away. Then the sensational news hit the papers. Brad had filed for divorce from Jenny. It came as a complete shock to me, and I couldn't understand why. The children were as confused as I was, but a few weeks passed and it emerged that Brad had caught Jenny with billionaire Ted Dumont. That explanation spoke for itself. Jenny was changing again. Ted was not only richer than Brad, but also significantly younger. Darla and I couldn't help but smile at this turn of events. Shortly after Brad and Jenny's divorce was finalized, Jenny married Ted. That was great for me. Ted didn't live in the Chesterton School District. So, for practical reasons, Glenda and Mark lived with Darla and me full-time. Shortly after Alma's death, I convinced John to sell his house and move in with us. And since John was a good builder, Darla hired him to renovate the ranch. Then Darla and I decided to expand the house to make a dining room for the ranch workers and expand my accounting office. This caused another fight with Brad. He fought to prevent us from getting a building permit. In the end, we got the permit because we had excellent right-of-way. John took responsibility for the new construction and did about 85% of the work himself. A little over a year after Ted and Jenny's wedding, Jenny filed for divorce. Rumor had it that Jenny had caught Ted with an 18-year-old girl. Then another rumor surfaced, which I later learned was true. Ted had married Jenny only because he didn't like Brad and decided to take his wife away from him. So much for karma. Now I wake up every morning and thank God for all the blessings he has given me. From 10 to 30 years after Dee Dee. Years passed, we had ups and downs, and one terrible tragedy. Mark was in a car accident that could have killed him. However, he was lucky and got away with a broken leg and wrist, as well as bruises, abrasions, and cuts. John suffered a minor stroke, which left him with slight paralysis on the left side of his body. Physical therapy helped him, and now he walks with only a slight limp. Darla never seems to get sick. She told me she doesn't have time to be sick with 4 children, a ranch, and me. I, on the other hand, have been very lucky. I hadn't been feeling well for several weeks. I had no energy, headaches, and nausea. I didn't pay much attention to it until one day Darla took me by the hand and dragged me to the doctor. After a series of tests, it turned out that one of my arteries was so clogged that I was on the verge of a heart attack. I had surgery and triple bypass surgery. After the operation, even though I was still lying in a hospital bed, I couldn't believe how much better I felt. If you're wondering whether I thought about going back to Jenny after she was alone, the answer is no, of course not. The thought never crossed my mind until Darla brought it up. One evening after dinner, as we were watching television, the thought occurred to me. Darla asked me, "Have you ever thought about going back to Jenny?" Darla tried to say it casually, but I could see the fear in her eyes. One day, I saw an elderly man in the lobby and went over to offer my help. When he looked up, I was shocked. It was Brad. "Brad, what a surprise," I said, extending my hand. Brad took my hand and shook it weakly. He didn't seem impressed, but before I could say a word, he spoke. "You won," he said sadly. "I won what?" I asked, confused. "I really loved her," Brad said, "and I thought she really loved me." And then I realized he was talking about Jenny, and I suggested, "Yes, she has a way of making you fall in love with her. But Jenny always had one big flaw. She was born poor and never came to terms with it. She thinks that more money means more happiness." "Now I understand how you felt when Jenny left you," Brad admitted. "How did you survive?" "Day by day with the help of a loving woman," I replied honestly. "There's no magic formula," Brad sighed. "It's too late for me to look for someone else. Besides, I love Jenny with all my heart. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I have stage IV cancer and I wanted to apologize to you. I knew it was wrong to pursue a married woman, but I simply fell in love with Jenny. I hope you can forgive me someday." Looking at the old man standing in front of me, I realized that I had once hated him with all my being. But now, I just felt sorry for him. "Brad, there was a time when I hated you," I admitted. "But that was a long time ago, and if you want me to forgive you, I will." He smiled sadly again, thanked me, and left. 5 months later, he died. Darla and I went to the funeral. I was surprised how few people showed up. However, Jenny was among those present. She was very upset by Brad's death and even more upset with me. "You had to come and rub it in, didn't you?" Jenny lashed out at me. "You couldn't let me bury him in peace. You wanted everyone to see that you won." I was furious. "You're a hypocrite. You left him for a rich man and now you're crying crocodile tears over his death." Brad apologized to me a few months ago and I accepted his apology. "Did you ever apologize to Brad for setting him up?" I didn't wait for an answer. I took Darla by the hand and we left. We drove home in silence, but then Darla turned to me and asked, "Who pooped in your cereal this morning?" I couldn't help but laugh. Darla always knew how to make me laugh. When Brad's will became public, I was surprised. Oh, he left most of his fortune to charity in his alma mater. But he also left $2 million to Jenny. Jenny, who had received this latest inheritance from 2 wealthy husbands, lived quite well. She bought an apartment near the ranch and tried to reconnect with her children. However, the children did not want to move in with their mother. Since the apartment was designed for single middle-aged people, they complained that there was nothing for them to do there. But I told them that their mother was making an effort and they should too. In the end, the distance proved too great. In the end, Jenny gave up and found a new boyfriend. Since then, Jenny has changed boyfriends like people change socks. The children seemed happy not to have to spend time at their mother's house. And since they were happy, I was happy. I was very proud of our children. Mark graduated from the Georgia Institute of Technology with a degree in engineering. He works and lives in Austin. He married a lovely girl from Ohio, Cindy Stubbins. whom he met at the Georgia Institute of Technology. She is also an engineer, and they work for the same company. They have two beautiful daughters, and Cindy works from home. Glenda enrolled at Texas A&M University to become a veterinarian. After graduating, Glenda moved back home and worked for a few years at a local veterinarian, Sam Turner. She then left him and opened her own practice. About a year later, a young veterinarian named Todd Ambers bought Sam's practice. It was probably inevitable, but Glenna and Todd eventually merged their practices and their lives when they got married. They have two boys and a girl, and I swear my grandchildren spend more time at the ranch than they do at their own home. Not only do Darla and I love having them around, but Jenny's father probably spends more time with the kids than anyone else. They just adore him. My daughter Alma graduated from the University of Texas with a teaching degree. She is now a third-grade teacher at Chesterton Elementary School. She married her college boyfriend, Jerry, who is a teacher at Marion High School. He teaches chemistry. In 3 months, give or take a few days, they are expecting their first child. I couldn't be happier because I adore my grandchildren. They're better than my own children. I'm joking, but grandchildren talk a lot. You can spoil them endlessly, and when they get cranky and fussy, you can just send them back. Mark married a beautiful girl he met while on holiday in England. No, she wasn't English, she was just an American on holiday. Her name is Sally. She's 5 feet tall with long black hair and purple eyes. I tease her by saying she's a mini Elizabeth Taylor. They have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and we just found out she's pregnant with their 4th. I'm amazed that Sally, being so petite, has had no problems carrying these children. The years flew by, and before we knew it, Darla and I celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary. I haven't seen Jenny much in the last few years. The children talk to their mother sometimes, but they don't see her often. From what they say, time has not been kind to their mother as it has not been kind to any of us. She is no longer the beauty she once was, and apparently she hasn't had a boyfriend in years. Jenny called her father about once every 2 months. He was already in his 90s, but he was still mobile and alert. The conversations between father and daughter were always quite short, and John always seemed a little down. When I asked him once why he didn't talk to Jenny longer, he admitted that he just didn't know what to say to her. I felt sad for John. Christmas was approaching again, and I went to the shopping center to buy Christmas presents. I had long since admitted that I was completely useless at choosing presents, so I simply found out which shops my family liked to go to. Then I would go there and buy gift cards. I know it sounds silly, but that way I never buy the wrong thing, the wrong size, or the wrong color. And so far, none of my purchases have been a disappointment. Anyway, I just bought my latest gift card and I was hungry. So I went to the food court to order a Chick-fil-A sandwich and lemonade. I was about to take my first bite when I recognized the woman sitting 2 tables away from me. It was Jenny. She was sitting alone, watching people walk by. She was particularly interested in the families filling the shopping center. Jenny was no longer the beauty I had married. She had gained about 15 kilograms and had a few wrinkles. Even from where I was sitting, I could see the age spots on her hands. Nevertheless, she was attractive for her age, but it was the loneliness in her eyes that caught my attention. I decided not to hesitate and approached her. "Hi, can I join you?" I asked, placing my sandwich and drink on the table. "What do you want?" Jenny replied sharply. I was surprised by her hostility. It took me a few seconds to realize what was going on, but then I picked up my sandwich and drink. "I don't want anything. I just wanted to say hello. Sorry to bother you. I don't want to argue, so I'd better find another table." A pained expression appeared on Jenny's face, and she flinched slightly. "No, I'm really sorry. The holidays seem to bring out the worst in me. Please sit down. I want to talk." "What brought you to the mall? Christmas shopping?" I asked, taking a bite of my chicken sandwich. "Mike, I haven't done any Christmas shopping since I divorced Brad. Now, I just send checks. And the kids really appreciate it, especially the grandchildren. They're saving the money for college." "I know," Jenny replied, watching a young couple walk by with a pram. "Oh, they write about it in their thank you letters." So, back to the original question. What brought you to the shopping center? As I recall, you don't like shopping at all. If you need something, you go to the store, buy it, and go home. "I just wanted to be around people," Jenny replied, distracted by a young couple trying to seat 3 children at a table. "Everyone in my family spends their holidays separately." "What are you doing for Christmas? You're not going to sit alone in your flat, are you?" "Of course not," Jenny replied. I've booked a table at Chez Francesca's, and then I plan to see the new Tom Hanks film. No, you're not going, I said, finishing my sandwich. You're coming to the ranch for Christmas. Your children and grandchildren will be there. And your father will be there too. It'll be fun. I can't, Jenny objected. I'll just get in everyone's way. Nonsense, I said, gathering up the trash. It's decided. You're coming. Then, as I was leaving, I looked back and said, if you want to see your grandchildren open their presents, you'd better be there by 7 in the morning. But come whenever you want. Dinner will be at 3. Darla wasn't too happy when I told her that Jenny was coming for Christmas. Why did you invite her? She asked, jealous and uncertain. I quickly hugged my wife and kissed her. Is my wife jealous? Come on, Mike. I'm serious. Darla's eyes were now burning. She'll make everyone feel uncomfortable. That's what Jenny said when she tried to get out of it. But I couldn't let her spend the day alone in my flat. What happened to Jenny? John asked, entering the room. I invited Jenny to Christmas, I said to the man I considered my second father. And she said yes? John's eyes lit up, and I noticed that Darla had noticed too. Not exactly, I explained. Jenny tried to talk me out of it because she thought it would be awkward for everyone, but I wouldn't take no for an answer. Whether she comes or not is up to her. The look of happiness in John's eyes faded, but it was quickly replaced by a look of hope. On Christmas Day, Jenny didn't come to see her grandchildren open their presents, and she didn't show up for dinner at 3 o'clock. By then, I knew she wasn't coming, and John seemed to think so too. He looked dejected and sat quietly in a corner. I felt sorry for him, and eventually I sent my youngest granddaughter, Christy, who was 4, to play with him. As I expected, he was soon sitting on the floor playing Candyland. Around 4:30, I was surprised to hear the doorbell ring. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see Jenny. She was dressed as if she was about to go out for dinner. Hello, I said kindly. I was beginning to lose hope that you would come. I still think this might be a mistake, she said, uncertainty in her eyes. No, of course not, I assured her. You missed dinner, but we'll be serving dessert soon. But if you want something to eat, I can heat up a plate of leftovers for you. No, dessert will be fine, Jenny said as I showed her into the house. Hey guys, I called to everyone in the living room. Look who I found. Jenny came for dessert. My grandchildren rushed over to her. They divided into teams for some game, and everyone wanted Jenny on their team. Mark and Glenda came over, hugged and kissed their mother, and wished her a Merry Christmas. In fact, all the children hugged her. However, to my surprise, Darla also hugged and kissed Jenny. The evening was very pleasant. Jenny was very nervous at first and seemed to weigh every word she said, but when she finally realized that she was the only one who felt awkward, she began to relax. It was touching to see Jenny and her father sitting together, talking and laughing. Overall, it was a very pleasant Christmas. Although Jenny had calmed down since arriving, it was obvious that she still felt awkward in Darla's house and around me. And I must admit that I found myself watching Jenny from time to time. She was still an attractive woman, but I was surprised that I felt nothing for her other than that she was the mother of my 2 children. When the grandchildren had settled down, their parents decided to take advantage of the hot tub. Since it was 34 degrees outside, neither Darla, Jenny, nor I were interested. John decided to give it a try, but after a few minutes he came back and said you'd have to be crazy to sit in a bath, even if it was heated to 30 degrees. Anyway, I brought us all some drinks and we sat around the fireplace where the Christmas tree was twinkling. We sat in silence for 15 minutes, watching the dancing flames. At one point, I noticed tears streaming down Jenny's face. Are you okay? I asked, not understanding where the tears were coming from. Everything will be fine, Jenny replied in a quiet voice, wiping away her tears. Neither Darla nor I said a word about the tears, and silence enveloped us again. After 5 minutes, Jenny spoke. I almost didn't come, she said, staring at the fire. I was afraid to find out what I already knew. I've ruined my whole life. Oh, I think you're being too hard on yourself, Darla said. I saw the pictures of you and Brad, and it was clear that you loved him. And I can say the same about Ted. Neither marriage worked out, but 50% of all marriages end in divorce. Oh, I really loved Brad at first, even though I still loved you, Mike. But I loved his money and power more. We were happy together for many years, but I let him distance me from the children. And since he was 15 years older than me, age started to take its toll. He started having health problems that affected his performance in bed. He became irritable and angry. I started cheating on Brad about 6 months before I started seeing Ted. I saw the same pain and hatred in Brad's eyes that I see in yours, Mike. Almost from the beginning of our marriage, I suspected Ted of cheating on me. And when I caught him, he just laughed at me. He told me he hated Brad because of some business deal and only married me out of revenge. I was stunned and suddenly understood how you and Brad felt. After I got rid of Ted, I decided to hell with marriage. I was just going to enjoy life. I had more than enough money to do whatever I wanted, so I went from one loveless relationship to another. That was all Jenny could muster by way of an apology. After a few minutes of silence, Jenny emptied her glass and stood up. I have to go. Darla, John, and I tried to convince Jenny to stay the night, but she refused. Then John and I walked her to her car. Her father hugged her tightly and told her he loved her. Jenny cried again. She wiped her tears and before getting into the car, hugged me tightly and said, "Thank you." Then Jenny drove away. I don't know what the next few years will bring. I believe that Jenny sincerely regrets many of her life choices. The decision of whether to reunite with her family is hers to make. The house was quiet, except for the occasional crackling and popping of the fire in the fireplace. I couldn't help thinking about how sad my ex-wife must be, and yes, I felt sorry for her. I wanted to hit myself for all the time I had spent trying to get revenge on Jenny and Brad. Sitting and watching the fire dance, I remembered a verse from the Bible. Not for the swift, nor for the strong, nor for the wise, nor for the rich, nor for the learned, but for those who fear God and keep his commandments. As it turned out, time was the true avenger. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.